Hello everybody, welcome to HM Studio. In this video, I'll be teaching you how to make some materials for this scene which you've already learned how to model in the previous tutorial. We'll basically making it ready for the lighting process. But before we start, please take a moment and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, if you don't want to miss my next video which will be about interior lighting for the same scene. Now let's jump into 3ds Max and start this one. Okay, here we go. To start with, I've organized this scene and created a layer structure and everything is in its corresponding layer. Actually, you should do the same thing for all of your projects since it makes it way easier to manage your scene. Now if I turn off this layer, all the extra models inside the room will disappear, and since most of them already have materials, we don't need them anyways. Now for the first step, I'm going to select all the objects in the scene except the ones that already have material, which would be the doors and windows. Then I would open up my material editor by clicking on this button over here or pressing the M key on my keyboard. Alright, let's create a Vray material and assign it to the selected objects. Okay, the second thing we need to do is to add a light source in the scene so we could see what we're doing. And for that we can create a Vray sun either from here, or we can go to the Create tab, Lights, Vray, and Vray sun. After creating the sun, Vray will ask you if you want to add a Vray sky as your environment light. Obviously yes. And because I already have an environment light, it asks me if I want to replace that one with this new one, and I should say yes to this one as well. Now let's move the sun a bit higher on the z-axis. And okay, that is good. After making some adjustments to our render settings, we would be ready to make some materials. So let's go ahead and click on this button over here or press F10 on your keyboard. Now go to the Vray tab and change the image sampler to bucket. Then change the max subdivs to 10 and the noise threshold to 0.03 so it renders a bit faster. Let's change the min shading rate to 24. And yeah. Okay, by the way, these render settings need a separate video, so let's not worry about these numbers for now. Okay, under the GI tab, I'm going with the default settings, and as for the last step, let's add a light mix into the elements, cause I'm sure it will come in handy as we go. Now let's open up the frame buffer from here and start the interactive rendering to see what we have so far. As you can see, it's completely burned out, and that's because of the exposure value that hasn't been adjusted yet. So to fix it, we can press the 8 key on the keyboard, or we should select environment from the rendering menu. Now you should select physical camera exposure control from here and increase the exposure value up to 13. This number could be different for different scenarios, and that totally depends on the intensity of your lights. But for the standard Vray sun and sky, 13 or 13.5 would usually work perfectly. Alright, I would like to make the room a bit brighter so we would be able to see the materials that we are creating better, right? And for that, we need to increase the skylight intensity. So let's select the light mix from here and increase the environment light until we're happy with the result. In this case, let's go with 5. And now to get rid of this burned out effect, we can add an exposure adjustment layer from here and reduce the highlight burn like this. By the way, I should tell you this is not a lighting tutorial and I'm just creating a simple daylight situation so we could test out our materials. You can also do this with an HDRI light where you isolate every object and test their materials separately, but for this tutorial we're gonna go with this method. Now to apply the changes that we've made into the scene, we can simply click on this button over here, but make sure your render has been stopped before doing this. Alright, I think we can start with the floor material, which is the most dominant material in the scene. So let's open up the material editor either by clicking here or pressing the M key on your keyboard, and then create a Vray material right from here. Alright, since we used the floor generator to create this floor, we have separated planks or elements here, and we can actually use a different texture for each plank. Or we can use a big texture and randomize it all over these planks. For this one, I'll go with different textures for each plank so you could learn how to use the Vray multi-texture map, and we'll practice how to randomize a bigger texture on a different object using a Vray UVW randomizer a bit further away in the video. So for this one, I've actually made these textures out of a bigger texture, which is this one. And how did I do that? If you already know how, you can totally skip this part. But anyways, if we go back into 3ds Max and select this floor object, you can see that each plank's dimension is 120 by 20 centimeters. So what I did was to open this bigger texture in Photoshop, selected the select tool, put it on fixed size from here, and use the same dimension but in pixels. 1200 by 200 pixels, which is the same proportion that we have for each plank. Now we can get some random selections out of this texture. Let's copy the selected area by pressing Ctrl C on your keyboard or doing it from here. Then create a new file from here and hit OK. Then paste the copied selection either from here or pressing Ctrl V on your keyboard. Now let's make another texture as we did before, and we can repeat the process until we have enough textures. All we have to do is to save them with different names like this. Now that we have the textures, what we have to do is to go back inside 3ds Max and assign a Vray multi-subtexture to the diffuse map of the material that we've created before. Now here you can introduce a pack of textures to this map, and we already have them. So let's create a Vray bitmap like this and load the first texture to this map by dragging and dropping the texture to this field like so. Okay, let's see how many textures we have. There are 8 of them. So let's make the same amount of copies by holding the Shift key on your keyboard and just dragging this texture with the left click on your mouse. Okay, now we should assign different textures to all of these different bitmaps. Alright, now we have to connect each one of these bitmaps to one of these nodes like so. Now we're done. You can see that we have 7 textures plus the base texture. So let's change the total IDs to 7. Alright, since we want these textures to be randomized, we have to change the getID from to random, and then select by element from here. This option will randomize the textures based on elements, and since each plank is a separate element, each will have a random texture. Now let's apply this material to the floor and render it out to see how it looks so far. Okay, you can clearly see that the textures are properly randomized, and we can apply this material to all the other floor objects that we have in the scene. Alright, let's take a look at the photos that we've used to create this scene. But first let me tell you about the PureRef. It's actually a very useful app that you can create mood boards with. And you can literally drag and drop any photo into this app and have it always on top. And the good thing is that it's free. I'll put the download link into the description if you want to give it a try, and you should probably do that. Okay, I think this one is the best reference for the floor material, so let me just put it right here and we can start. A very important tip. All the materials that you see around you are 100% reflective. What makes them look different is their roughness or glassiness value. The smoother the surface is, the more glossy it will be. Although we have metallic materials that are a bit different, and we'll talk about them in a different video. Okay, knowing that, let's just change the reflections color to white. And after that, we need to adjust the glossiness value. As you can see in this picture, the surface has different glossiness in different areas. Where it has this matte finish look, we should use a lower glossiness value, and where it looks glossier, we have to use higher values. So when we have this type of situation, we have to use a map for our glossiness, and in this case, we should use the textures that we already have. So let's create a color correction node, then feed this map into it. Then let's make the texture black and white by reducing the saturation all the way down. And now we can connect it to the reflection glossiness node. Okay, where we have the darker areas on this texture, we will have a matte finish. And where it's brighter, we will have a glossier look. Let me go closer a bit and you can clearly see the effect. Now, what we should have to do to get it closer to our reference picture. To do that, we can add an output map right in here. This map works just like the curves adjustments that we have in Photoshop. The right side of the curve represents the brighter areas and the left side is for the darker areas. Now let's enable it from here and we can add a point to the curve with this tool. Let's add one right here in the middle. Now if I move this point higher, the texture will get brighter, thus the surface will get glossier, and the opposite will happen if I move it down. Now what we have to do is to right click on this point, make it Bezier smooth, then make the curve smoother with these handles and just adjust its position to get the result that you're looking for, and in this case we have to make it a bit brighter. Alright, I guess the difference between the matte and glossy areas are looking the same as our reference, but it's burned out, and to fix it we can reduce the highlight burn a bit more. I will also make a series of videos about making materials in details, which honestly is not the purpose of this video. I would rather keep this one as simple as possible. Okay, the next step is to add some bumpiness to this surface. And for that, we can just use the same black and white texture that we have. And depending on how much bumpiness we need, we can increase or decrease its value. And in this case, I think the default value of 30 is good enough. Alright, in general, it looks quite good. But it looks way brighter than our reference. To make it a bit darker, I have to add a color correction map right here for the diffuse map. Let's double click on it, select the advanced mode from here and decrease the gamma value down to 0.8. Maybe even less than that. Let's try 0.65. Yeah, that's much better and we're done with this one. Okay, the next material we're going to make is this matte black one. The first thing we have to do is to select all the objects that will have this material. Alright, let's create another Vray material and change the diffuse color to black. But we would never use 000 since none of the materials in this world except the metallic ones is pure black. So let's change the value to 5. Hit OK and assign it to all the selected objects. As I told you before, all the materials are 100% reflective, so let's change the reflections color to white. Now let me find a better angle. Alright, let's take care of the glossiness. I'm going to reduce its value until I roughly get the same result. The next thing we gotta do is to give a little bit of chamfer to these edges since they're razor sharp right now and we don't want that. Let me find a better angle here. Okay. To do that, we just need to use a Vray edge texture for the bump map. Let's just drag and drop it into the material editor and connect it to the bump node. Now if I slightly zoom in, you can clearly see the result here. Let's see the before and after. You can also adjust its radius from here. The bigger the number, the more chamfer you will have. But for this one, 1mm is good enough. Okay, we're basically done with this material. But to give it a bit more detail, we can make it a little bit dirty by adding some swirling marks that might always happen after cleaning a surface with wet wipes. And to do that, what we have to do is to use a texture. So let's create a Vray bitmap connected to the reflection glassiness node, and let's use this texture that I've already picked before. Now we just need to adjust the brightness of this texture, and for that we can use an output map as we did before. But before doing that, we need to add a UVW map modifier to all of these objects with this material. To select all of them, we can simply click on this button over here and hit OK. And there you have them selected. Now let's apply a UVW map from the modifier list and put it on the box mode and enable the real world map size. Now double click on this Vray bitmap and adjust the size of this texture under coordinate settings. Let's go with 150 by 150 centimeters, and that means this texture will repeat on the object every 150 centimeters. Now we can go ahead and fix the glossiness to achieve the same result as we have on this picture. As you can see, this texture is too dark and we need to make it brighter. So let's add an output map here and play with this curve with enabling it from here. Then adding a point in the middle like so. And as I told you before, the brighter the texture, the glossier the result will be, and vice versa. So to get this result, firstly right click on this point and make it Bezier smooth. And make the texture a bit brighter like so. Alright, you can see these marks have appeared already. Let's play with the curve a bit more to get a better result. Okay, I think it looks pretty cool and I would leave it like that. For the next one, we can create the plaster material for the walls and the ceiling. For this one, we are going to have a different approach. I've already taught you how to use the bridge in one of my other videos, and if you still haven't watched that, I'll put it on a card at the end of this video so you could check it out. Alright, let's open up the bridge and let's go to the surface category, then plaster, and here we have plenty of different materials that we can choose from. And for this one, I would go with the very first one. Okay, after selecting it, you need to choose the resolution that you want the textures to be, and let's download it from here. After downloading is finished, I'd go back to 3ds Max and select one of the objects that is supposed to have this material. Then I'll go back to the bridge and export the material by clicking on the export button right here. Alright, it's been exported successfully. Let's go back to 3ds Max and you can see the material is already applied to this wall. Alright, now let's open up the material editor. Then pick the material off of the wall like this. And here you have it. Now we can apply this material to the ceiling or any other object that we want. If I select this wall, you can see that there's a Vray displacement applied to this geometry, and that's been added by the bridge. But I don't think we need to use it for this material, and we can simply get rid of it by turning it off by clicking right here. Alright, now let's apply this material to the ceiling as well. Okay, if you open the bridge and select this material, you can see the actual size of this material, which is 2 by 2 meters. So we need to apply a UVW map to all the objects with this material, use box mapping, and change the size accordingly. Alright, let's render it out to see how it looks. Okay, I think it looks pretty cool and we can leave it like that. The next material will be this countertop. It's a pretty simple white glossy material that would take a minute to make it. So let's create a Vray material and assign it to these two objects. Now go ahead and change the diffuse color to 190 and let's start the IPR so we could see the result as we go. Once again, we should make the reflections color white. Okay, it seems that I haven't applied the material, so let's do that first. Alright, now if you take a closer look, you can see that some blurriness is happening here, and that means we have to reduce the glossiness value. Let's start with 0.95, maybe less. Okay, 0.95 seems to be good. The last step is to give it a little bit of chamfer, and you already know how to do that. So let's apply a Vray edge text to the bump node, and we're done with this material. Okay, for the next one we can create the wood material for this bookshelf. The whole thing will be like what we did for the floor, but instead of a Vray multi-stop texture, we're going to use a Vray UVW randomizer. So let's go ahead and create a Vray material. Then we need to create a Vray bitmap and connect it to the diffuse node. And we have to load the texture into it like this. Okay, I'm going to apply the material first, then I'll change its dimensions under the coordinate settings. Let's go with 120 by 120. Alright, now we need to apply a UVW map to the selection and use the box mapping mode with real world map size enabled. As you can see, the direction of the texture is not correct. To fix it, let's select the gizmo from here and rotate it by 90 degrees. Okay, now the problem is with the vertical elements right here. To fix that, I'm going to convert this object to editable mesh. Then we'll select the vertical elements and apply a UVW map only to these selections. Now let's select the gizmo and rotate it until it's in the right direction. Okay, cool. Now, if I render this out, you'll see that we have a repetitive pattern on all of these elements, which is not ideal and we have to get rid of it by using a Vray UVW randomizer map. Okay, let's connect it to this Vray bitmap. Now that we have this map added to our bitmap, these numbers are not going to work anymore, and we have to adjust the size inside the randomizer. Let's double click on it and use the same dimensions here. Okay, here you can see that we have different options to randomize a texture, but for this one I'm going to use the Face ID option, and in order to do that we have to have different IDs for different elements. To achieve that, I'm going to use a material by element modifier. So let's find it in the modifier list and apply it to this geometry. Now let's select random distribution and increase this number up to 10. Now if I convert this to editable mesh, you can see that we have 10 different IDs. Different elements with different IDs, like this. Okay, now let's enable by Face ID and disable randomized rotations by changing this number to 0, because all I want is the texture to offset, not rotate. Now let's render it again and see if it works. Alright, you can see that each element has a different part of the texture and we've gotten rid of the repetition that we had before. Now we have to take care of the reflection and glossiness, and it would be the exact same way that we've done it for the floor and all the other materials. Alright, there's a tricky part to this material, and that's when we want to have a chamfered edge and we already have a texture plugged into our bump node. So the trick is using a composite map. Let's create one right here and select layer 1. Now double click on it and add another layer by clicking on this button. Now we have to move this texture to the second layer like this and use a Vray edge texture for the first layer. Okay, here you can see the result. Okay, I think we can reduce the bump value a little bit. It's too rough at the moment. By the way, I have another tutorial about the composite map, and I think you have to watch that one as well. The things that you can create with this map will exponentially increase the quality of your materials. I'll put a link to that video on a card at the end of this video if you want to check that one out. Alright guys, that was all for this tutorial, and in the next one I'll teach you how to do the lighting for this scene and also a little bit of post-production as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, a like on this video will be much appreciated, and please don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss my other tutorials. Have a great one, and I'll catch you in the next one.